I forgot to tell my son-in-law that the old chest wasn't empty, and when I opened it, I discovered that my brother Stephen had left me the true inheritance, while everyone else celebrated Ryan getting millions. I woke up before sunrise. My body doesn't obey me like it used to. My knees crackle, and my back reminds me with every step that I'm past 65. But that day was not just any day. Ever since I knew they would read the will of my brother Stephen, the man who built a fortune in land, houses, and businesses, I couldn't sleep in peace. I knew there would be stares, whispers, and certainly mockery, but I had to be there. I put on the only white shirt I own, already yellow at the cuffs, and on top of that my old hat, its brim drooping from so many years in the sun. Isabella, my daughter, came to pick me up in her husband's truck. Ryan didn't even get out to greet me. He just opened the back door and drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Impatient. Like I was wasting his time. As soon as I got in, he took off abruptly, and on the way he started yelling into his phone, bragging to a friend. I heard him say with a bragging tone, "You'll see, man. We're getting the big house and Stephen's land. This is going to change our lives." I felt my ears burn, but I said nothing. I looked out the window to distract myself. On the town streets, some early risers greeted each other. Others chatted among themselves. I managed to hear fragments. They say it's over $35 million. Who will get all of that? My name was not on their lips. I knew it. To everyone I was the poor brother, the one who never left the carpentry workshop, the one who settled for just surviving. We arrived at the lawyer Mr. Herrera's office. The place was packed. There were distant relatives, some of Stephen's partners, curious neighbors. The air felt heavy, charged with expectation. I made my way through in silence, with my cane in hand, and looked for a seat in the back row. Ryan, on the other hand, strode confidently forward and sat next to the lawyer's desk, with Isabella beside him, like he already owned the place. The lawyer, an older man with well-combed white hair, arranged his papers and began to read. His deep voice echoed in the room. He named the assets one by one. The mansion in the city, several plots of land on the outskirts, a collection of antique cars, bank accounts, a trust fund. Everything, absolutely everything, was designated to my daughter and to Ryan. There were murmurs, gasps of surprise, even applause. I saw Ryan smile with satisfaction and squeeze Isabella's hand tightly, like someone claiming victory. I remained still, my heart heavy in my chest. I wasn't surprised that Stephen trusted his niece, but I felt a sting of bitterness watching Ryan gloat, as if he had won a bet. The lawyer paused, glanced at a smaller paper, and with an enigmatic smile said, "And finally, for his younger brother, Julian, he leaves an old wooden chest." For a second there was total silence. Then the laughter filled the room. I felt my face flush. Ryan leaned back in his chair, let out a mocking laugh, and muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Useless old man. You aren't even worth $1. You deserve a pile of rotten firewood." Some relatives joined in the laughter. Others feigned sympathy, muttering, "How sad, being blood brothers." But no one defended me. I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to the desk. I took the pen and signed the document to receive the ridiculous object assigned to me. I felt everyone's eyes fixed on my back, each stare like a thorn. As the lawyer closed the folder, Ryan stood up, approached me, and said in a low voice, almost in my ear, "Don't even think about claiming anything else. It belongs to us now. You don't count." I didn't answer. I just picked up the chest. It was heavier than I expected. The wood was worn, the hinges rusted. I carried it with effort, but without asking for help. I walked out into the street, blinded by the midday sun. The heat made me sweat instantly, and I felt the drops run down my forehead. In the distance, some passers-by who had heard the news pointed at the chest and laughed among themselves. I saw how Isabella, my daughter, looked down, hiding behind Ryan, unable to meet my gaze. That hurt more than the mockery. I walked slowly toward my old truck, the one barely held together with rivets and duct tape. Every step felt eternal, as if the weight of the chest was sinking not only my shoulders but my soul. The sound of laughter still echoed in my ears when I opened the door and placed the chest on the back seat. I took a deep breath, adjusted my hat, and told myself I had to endure. Because even though everyone saw a finished old man with a worthless wooden box, I still had a remnant of dignity inside me. No one was going to take that away. I secured the chest in the back of my old truck. I tied it down with a rope I had used too many times, making sure it wouldn't move on the bumpy road. The sun was beating down, and as I bent over to tighten the knots, I felt the sweat on my forehead. The chest seemed to weigh more than I did. It wasn't just the wood, it was the weight of the shame I carried with it. I started the engine with difficulty. It coughed twice before turning over, as if the truck itself hesitated to join me on this return trip. I had barely gone a few yards when I heard the roar of a powerful engine. Ryan sped past in his new, shiny black sports car. He honked his horn insistently and rolled down the window just to shout, "Be careful with your treasure, you useless old man! Don't lose it!" His laughter mixed with the roar of the engine as he sped away, leaving me swallowing dust. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. I didn't respond. At my age, you learn that answering an insult only feeds the aggressor. But it hurt, and it wasn't a little. As I turned the corner, I saw a group of young men sitting on the terrace of the town cafe. They all knew him. They all knew he was the rich heir now. They saw me with my battered truck, with the chest tied in the back, and burst out laughing. "And look at Mr. Julian," one shouted. "Now he owns an empty coffin." "There's probably nothing in there but old nails and sawdust," added another. The laughter continued until I had passed them by. I pretended not to hear them, but every laugh drilled into my chest. I kept driving slowly. In the makeshift market by the downtown square, some vendors looked up as the truck passed. One woman whispered to another, "Poor man. What a humiliation. Receiving only a box when the others get millions." I don't know if she said it with pity or cruelty, but it felt like a dagger. When I reached my street, the neighbors already knew. Gossip travels faster than wind in these small towns. Mrs. Linda, the one who's always sweeping her sidewalk, asked me from her door, "So what's in there, Julian? Did they really only leave you that?" I didn't know what to answer. I nodded my head and kept going without stopping. At the entrance to my house, Sarah came running out. Her braids were a little messy, and she was carrying her rag doll. She hugged my legs tightly and asked with her big innocent eyes, "Grandpa, is that a treasure?" I bent down with difficulty, stroked her hair, and forced a smile that cost me more than lifting the chest. "Maybe, sweetheart, maybe it is." I pushed the chest inside. The floorboards of the living room creaked under its weight. At that moment, I heard the voice of old Matthew, my lifelong neighbor, sitting in his rocking chair in the shade. He was smoking his cigar and said to me in a calm tone, "Don't dismiss the small things, Julian. They might hide what is great." I looked up and met his gaze. I didn't know if he was saying it to encourage me or if he truly believed it. I just nodded, too tired to respond. Inside the house, Isabella was in the kitchen. I could smell the beans in the pot and the hot oil. She didn't look up when I came in, nor did she ask me anything. She pretended to be busy, but her silence said more than any words. Ryan, of course, wasn't there. After the will reading, he had gone to celebrate with his friends at the bar downtown. The echo of laughter and tequila would accompany him while I, his father-in-law, carried an empty chest. I collapsed into my wooden chair, the one I made years ago in my workshop. I looked at the chest. The wood was faded, with damp stains, and the hinges looked worn. I ran my hand over the top, feeling the cracks. I wondered what Stephen had been thinking, leaving me this. A joke? A symbolic gesture? I didn't understand. Sarah, curious, sat on the floor in front of the chest. She tapped it gently with her knuckles and laughed. "It sounds hollow, Grandpa." That laugh cut through me like a ray of tenderness. I didn't want her to see the sadness in my eyes, so I looked away and stood up. I dragged the chest to a corner of the living room. I found the rusty key they had given me with it and locked it with a click. Then I hid the key under my pillow, as if I were protecting a real treasure. The afternoon dragged on. Outside, the neighborhood kids played ball, and every time it hit my wall, I heard the echo of their shouts. Inside, the silence was heavy. Only Sarah chattered, singing a song she had learned in school. When night fell, the wind blew hard. It snuck through the cracks in the windows and made the curtains move like ghosts. I lay down in my bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I closed my eyes and saw Ryan smile again, his triumphant grin, the way he called me useless in front of everyone. At midnight, my dog's barking startled me. I got up and looked out the window. A dark truck was passing slowly down the street, its tires crunching on the gravel. The headlights lit up my house for an instant, and then disappeared. I didn't recognize the vehicle, but a bad feeling lingered. I went back to bed. Sarah was sleeping soundly next to me because Isabella had let her stay with me that night. The girl held her doll tightly, her breathing was steady, her cheek pink from the warmth of the blanket. I watched her for a while. In her, I found my only peace. I turned off the lamp and closed my eyes, though sleep still wouldn't come. I just kept repeating the same question to myself. Is this chest a useless burden, or does it hide something I just can't see yet? Dawn crept through the cracks in the window and woke me up early. The neighbor's rooster had crowed twice, and the street was still quiet. I got up slowly, my back stiff, and looked at the corner where I had left the chest the night before. The old wood seemed to watch me from the shadows, as if waiting for me to take the next step. I decided to drag it to the center of the living room. I pulled it with effort across the tile floor. The scraping made a harsh noise that woke up Sarah. The girl appeared in the doorway with her doll in her arms, hair messy and cheeks still warm from sleep. "What are you doing, Grandpa?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "I'm going to clean it a little. It's covered in dust," I replied, grabbing an old rag. I wiped the cloth over the lid of the chest. Dust flew up in small clouds that made me cough. As I scrubbed harder, the wood creaked as if complaining. The smell of dampness and confinement hit me, bringing back memories of abandoned cellars and forgotten workshops. Sarah, amused, sat on the floor next to the chest. She started tapping the sides with her palms like it was a drum. "Look, Grandpa, it sounds hollow," she said, laughing. I smiled so as not to worry her, but her observation made me think. I leaned my ear closer and tapped with my knuckles. I noticed that in one corner the sound was different, deeper, as if there was something underneath. My heart skipped a beat. I got up and went to find a sharp knife I had in the kitchen. Sarah watched me, intrigued. I returned, knelt beside the chest, and began to feel the joints of the wood. On one edge, I felt the knife sink in more than it should. I pried it carefully and heard a click. A splinter of wood lifted, and a compartment was revealed before my eyes. My hands were shaking. Inside was a small cloth bag, grimy and dried out by time. I pulled it out carefully. I opened it, expecting to find something revealing, but it only contained a few rusty nails and a broken pocket watch. The glass was cracked, the hands stopped at some unknown time. I sighed with disappointment. "Just trash," I muttered. Sarah leaned in to look and wrinkled her nose. "That's the treasure?" I smiled sadly, placed the items to the side, and reached my hand back in. I felt something else wrapped in wax paper. I pulled hard, and a rectangular package covered in dry grease appeared. I unwrapped it, and my surprise grew. It was a cell phone, black, old, and covered in dust. I was paralyzed. I didn't understand what a device like this was doing in my brother's chest. I wiped the rag across the screen, and to my astonishment, a faint light turned on. My heart was pounding in my temples. Suddenly, without warning, the phone began to vibrate and ring. The buzzing filled the house, so loud that Sarah screamed and dropped her doll. I almost dropped the device myself. I looked at the screen. There was no name, just the word unknown. I hesitated for a few seconds, but finally I put the phone to my ear. A deep, rough voice spoke on the other end. "If you are hearing this, it means Stephen trusted you. The real inheritance begins here." My blood ran cold. I felt the air grow thick. I clung to the phone and asked with a shaky voice, "Who is this? What do you want?" The voice was silent for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. Then it replied, "The chest is just the beginning. Get ready. There will be instructions." And then the line went dead. The long dial tone echoed in my ear. Sarah tugged on my sleeve with wide eyes. "Grandpa, was that Uncle Stephen's voice?" I hugged her tightly. My voice barely came out in a whisper. "No, sweetheart, but someone is speaking on his behalf." I sat there for a long time with the phone in my hand, as if it weighed a ton. The house was silent, except for the distant street noise. Outside, the dogs began to bark insistently. I got up, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain back a little. On the corner, in the shadow of a lamppost, I made out the silhouette of a black car. Stopped. I could swear it was Ryan's car. The vehicle stayed for a few seconds, and then drove away slowly, with its lights off. I felt a chill down my spine. I shut the curtain quickly, hugged Sarah again, and tried to act calm, but deep down, I knew something big had just begun, and that the chest everyone dismissed hid a secret far heavier than any inheritance in bills or property. That night I went to bed, but I wasn't sleepy. I left the phone on the nightstand next to my bed like someone guarding a strange object, unsure if it would bring comfort or trouble. The lamplight hit the dark screen, and I felt like it could start vibrating again at any moment. Not even half an hour had passed since I lay down, when the device began to buzz. The sound, hoarse and constant, shattered the silence of the house. My heart raced. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and answered. "Who is this?" I whispered, almost voiceless. The same deep, rough voice came from the other side. It didn't say hello, didn't explain anything, just said in a dry tone, "Tomorrow, go to the outskirts of town. The old warehouse by the tracks. Bring the key from the chest. Don't tell anyone." I tried to ask more. "Wait, what? Why me? What's there?" But the line cut out immediately. I was left with the phone pressed to my ear, hearing only a dull tone that drilled into my head. I put the phone under my pillow. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The voice of that man, or whatever it was, kept echoing inside me. Was it someone who worked with Stephen? An accomplice? An enemy? I had no answers. At dawn I got up, more tired than when I had gone to bed. I put on my work shirt, the one I use for field work, and went out to the patio. The morning air was cool, but it couldn't calm me. I checked my truck. The tires, the gas, the ropes that would hold the chest. I knew it was going to be a long day. I put the phone in the inside pocket of my jacket and went inside to get the keys. Just then Sarah came running out of the kitchen. Her braids were freshly done, and she held her rag doll. "Grandpa, where are you going? Take me with you." I hugged her tight. She looked at me with those innocent eyes that always disarm me. "No, sweetheart. Stay with your mom. Grandpa will be back soon." She followed me to the gate, insisting, but finally she just stood there, watching me load the chest into the truck. Just as I was tying the ropes, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Still with that useless box? It was Ryan. He was wearing a light-colored suit, polished shoes, and holding an envelope with official seals. It was the property deed for the lands he had just inherited. He held it up as if to rub it in my face. "You should use that firewood to heat your chimney. It's not good for anything else." I didn't answer. I got in the truck and drove off without looking at him. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, arms crossed, watching me with suspicion, like someone who suspects they're missing something. The road to the outskirts of town was busy that morning. I passed the Wednesday market. Vendors shouted their offers. Fresh tamales, fruit baskets, fresh cheese. A woman raised her hand to offer me sweetbread, but I kept going. I had no appetite. In the town square, a group of kids were playing marbles. They were laughing loudly, and when they saw my truck pass, they pointed down the avenue where Ryan had driven by earlier in his new car. "Look, there goes the new rich man of the town," they shouted, celebrating him like a hero. I gritted my teeth. Nobody was celebrating the old man driving a rusty truck with a mysterious chest in the back. I drove to the edge of town, where the houses became less frequent and the roads dustier. The air smelled of metal and dry herbs. I finally reached the area of abandoned warehouses by the train tracks. The walls were cracked, covered in graffiti and rust stains. I stopped in front of a corroded iron door with the number 27 painted in faded white. I got out of the truck and took the key that came with the chest from my pocket. The metal resisted in the lock. I had to turn it hard. The sound of the rusty gears echoed in the silence like thunder. The door opened with a long, heavy groan. Inside, the darkness was thick. A smell of old iron and rancid oil hit me in the face. I took the flashlight from my jacket and turned on the beam. What I saw left me breathless. In the center of the warehouse, on the dust-covered floor, were 3 large metal trunks. On each one, carved in relief, was the letter S, the initial of my brother, Stephen. I approached slowly. My footsteps raised small clouds of dust. On an abandoned table covered in cobwebs rested a yellowish envelope. My name was written on it in Stephen's handwriting. For Julian. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a brief letter, written in a hurried hand. Brother, the real inheritance isn't what Ryan took. It's here, and only you will have the courage to protect it. I read and reread those words. I couldn't catch my breath. It was the first time I had felt Stephen so close since his death. Then, a noise startled me. Footsteps on the gravel. Slow, heavy, the sound of shoes hitting the stones. I immediately turned off the flashlight and hid in a corner pressed against the wall. From inside, through the crack of the half-open door, I could see the lights of a car parking outside. The headlights momentarily lit up the warehouse interior. My heart was pounding in my chest. I recognized the silhouette instantly. Ryan got out of the black car. He was walking nervously but with determination. His shadow stretched long on the ground, and each of his steps sounded like a warning. I stayed motionless, holding my breath. Outside, my son-in-law was prowling, and I understood that the game was just beginning. I remained silent, motionless, my back pressed against the warehouse wall. I could hear Ryan's footsteps outside, the crunch of his shoes on the gravel and the click of his lighter as he lit a cigarette. The ember lit up his face in the darkness for an instant, and then the smoke vanished into the night. My heart was pounding against my chest as if it wanted to escape. I held my breath. I couldn't make a sound. If he suspected anything, he would come in, and everything would fall apart. I closed the metal door of the warehouse with extreme care, just enough so the movement wouldn't be noticed from outside. I waited. I heard his car engine roar again, first idling and then accelerating hard. The sound faded into the distance until it was lost on the highway. Only the bitter smell of unburnt gasoline remained in the air. I sank onto a wooden bench, eaten by termites. My hands were damp with sweat. Awkwardly, I opened the small drawer where Stephen had left that envelope. Inside, there were only a few handwritten lines, and a tiny key hanging from a copper-colored thread. I held it under the trembling light of my flashlight. The message was short, almost cryptic. "This isn't all, brother. Look for more." My fingers tightened around the key. The exhaustion and fear muddled my mind, but I sensed there was still something missing. I remembered the chest resting in the back of my truck, tied down with ropes. Maybe I hadn't explored it thoroughly. I left the warehouse, made sure no one was around, and walked to the truck. I opened the back and looked at the chest under the dim yellow light of a distant street lamp. The wood was cracked in the corners, but it was holding. I ran my palm over the surface and noticed a slight creak, different from before. A gut feeling pushed me. I took my knife, the one with the bone handle I always carry, and carefully inserted it between the planks. I scraped at the joint for several minutes. The sound of metal against wood set my nerves on edge, as if Ryan could return at any moment. Suddenly, a part of the bottom gave way with a dry snap. The plank lifted just a few millimeters, revealing a false wall. I pushed with my fingers, and it came loose. What appeared underneath made my blood run cold. To a second compartment. More hidden, deeper than the first. Inside, protected by waxed cloth and tied with a hemp bow, was a rectangular package. I took it carefully, feeling the firm weight in my hands. I unwrapped it slowly. First, a brown envelope sealed with wax appeared, and underneath it a larger, heavy iron key, along with a small folded paper. I opened the paper. It had 6 numbers written in blue ink, still visible despite the time. I memorized them immediately, knowing this code must be important. The envelope, however, contained only a few phrases. "You already know the first door. This one will open the real one. Trust, but do not speak. Do not let anyone see you." I felt my breath catch. Everything before, the rusty nails, the broken watch, even the phone, seemed like a test, a prelude. This was different. The key felt heavy, like a sentence. I carefully put the discovery in the inside pocket of my jacket, the one I always keep buttoned. I adjusted the empty package under the loose plank, fit it back into place, and wiped it with the rag so the tampering wouldn't show. The sky was growing darker. The chirping of crickets filled the air, and occasionally an owl hooted from a nearby tree. I felt a chill, thinking that Ryan might still be watching from a distance. I hurried into the truck and started the engine. The drive back felt endless. The streetlights flickered, and the sound of the tires on the gravel was like a war drum. As I approached my street, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Ryan's black car was parked a few yards from my house, with its lights off. I didn't slow down. I pretended not to see it. I drove past for a few yards and turned the corner, circling around the back of the neighborhood. I took a dirt path that only the old-timers use, until I reached the back of my yard. I stopped there, unloaded the chest, and dragged it inside the house with effort, without making a sound. When I opened the door, Sarah ran to me with a notebook in her hand. "Grandpa, I learned a song in school today. Want to hear it?" Her clear, sweet voice filled the room, and for a moment I forgot the fear. I knelt, hugged her tightly, and kissed her forehead. "Sing it, sweetheart. Sing it." While she sang a simple tune, the sound of a car passing in front of the house brought me back to reality. The headlights lit up the window for a second. I recognized Ryan's silhouette, leaning against the hood, a cigarette between his lips and his eyes fixed on my door. The smoke mixed with the dusk, and the red ember of the cigarette glowed like a watchful eye. I closed the curtains, bolted the door, and stood listening to my son-in-law's footsteps on the sidewalk. I lit the oil lamp and stroked Sarah's hair, feigning calm so as not to scare her. But inside, the certainty burned. What I had just found wasn't just a key. It was the beginning of something bigger, and Ryan sensed it. I silently promised myself I wouldn't let him take it from me. I woke up before the roosters crow, when the sky was still gray and the air carried a damp chill that cut to the bone. I dressed in silence, trying not to wake Isabella or Sarah. The house was still asleep, but my mind was already alert. I knew this day would be decisive. I took the large key and the paper with the 6-digit code that I had found the night before. I hid them carefully inside the sole of my shoe. It was the only place I felt was safe. Ryan wouldn't suspect something so simple. As I walked into the hallway, I found Isabella in the kitchen making coffee. She asked me where I was going so early. I made up a quick excuse. "I'm going to the cemetery, sweetheart. To visit Stephen's grave. It's been a while since I stopped by." She looked at me with a certain sadness, but she didn't press. She knew my silences were part of my character. What she didn't know was that this lie was necessary to protect her. I started the truck. The engine protested with a couple of backfires before turning over. I took the road toward the outskirts, as if I were really going to the cemetery, but after a couple of miles, I turned onto a dusty track that led to an abandoned area near the train tracks. That place had an air of neglect. Rusted wagons rested in a line, covered in graffiti and weeds. The metal structures creaked with the wind, as if they still remembered the weight of trains that no longer passed. There, according to Stephen's envelope, I was supposed to find the entrance. I walked on foot through the twisted iron until I found a metal door, marked with a number that was almost erased but still visible under the faded paint, the same one I had read in the instructions. I knelt, took out the large key, and put it in the lock. The metal groaned with a harsh sound that made me fear the whole town could hear it. I had to turn it twice, hard, until the lock gave way suddenly. The door was as heavy as a tombstone. I pushed it open slowly, and a cloud of dust rose in the air, making me cough. I turned on my flashlight and took the first step inside. The space was large, much bigger than the previous warehouse. The beam of light illuminated 3 metal trunks, perfectly aligned in the center of the room. Each one was stamped with the letter S, firmly engraved. The silence inside was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. I approached the first trunk. It was sealed with a waxed paper strip and a red ink stamp. I broke the seal with trembling hands and lifted the lid. My eyes were dazzled. Inside, there were perfectly stacked gold bars, shining under the flashlight beam. The glare was almost blinding. I touched one. It was cold, solid, so heavy I could barely lift it a few inches. I closed it carefully and moved to the second trunk. The smell of new paper hit me immediately. Piles of dollar bills, held together with rubber bands, filled the entire space. I squeezed one between my fingers and felt the crisp crackle of the paper. The aroma of ink and cellulose was unmistakable. The third trunk held documents, folders with property deeds, maps marked with symbols, accounting ledgers, and even unfinished letters. I recognized Stephen's handwriting on some of the pages. It was as if my brother was speaking from beyond the grave. On a nearby table, covered in dust and cobwebs, was a leather-bound notebook. On the cover, Written in firm calligraphy, it read, "For Julian, from your brother Stephen." I sat down and opened the notebook. In the first few pages, Stephen recounted his business life, the alliances, the risks, the enemies. There were detailed accounts, names of partners, even warnings about people who had tried to deceive him. But on one special page, written in darker ink, I found these words: "Julian, you are the one who guards the family's flame. Ryan only knows how to destroy. This wealth is not for him. Use it well. Don't be tempted by pride or fear. The fate of our family is in your hands." I read and reread those sentences. The lump in my throat kept me from breathing normally. For the first time, I understood that Stephen had seen beyond the obvious, that his apparent contempt in the public will was a trap for Ryan and a test for me. I stood there motionless, looking at the gold bars, the bills, and the papers. The light coming through the cracks in the door reflected off the gold, filling the room with golden flashes. It seemed like an impossible dream, but the dream shattered in an instant. In the distance, I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine, faint at first, then closer and closer. My body tensed. I immediately turned off the flashlight and closed the trunks as fast as I could. I put the notebook back in its place, shut the lid of the last trunk, and pushed the door so it was just barely ajar. The noise grew until it was deafening. A car stopped right in front of the warehouse. I didn't have to look to know who it was. I recognized the deep purr of Ryan's engine. I hid behind an iron column, holding my breath. Through the crack in the door, I saw the dark silhouette of his black car. The headlights cut through the dusty road. The driver's door flew open. Ryan got out with hurried steps. His light jacket contrasted with the gloom, and his nervous walk gave him away. He looked from side to side like a hound on a scent. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid he could hear it. I closed my eyes for a moment and prayed in silence, asking for strength. I knew this encounter could no longer be avoided. Ryan had followed me here, and now he was one step away from discovering what Stephen had wanted to keep out of his hands. And I, a 65-year-old man, had to decide in that instant how to protect my brother's legacy. I sat at the wooden table in the warehouse, my heart still pounding like a hammer. The dust rose in small swirls every time I turned the pages of the leather notebook. I opened it with trembling hands. On the first page, written in firm ink, I recognized my brother's handwriting. For my brother, Julian. I felt a lump in my throat. I ran my fingers over the letters, as if I could feel his voice. It was the first time since his death that I felt him so close. I read slowly, like someone drinking water drop by drop. "Julian, I have seen too much greed in my life. Wealth is a magnet for the worst souls. Ryan is one of them. That's why I decided to leave him the public inheritance, the one everyone can see, as bait to trap his ambition. But to you, brother, to you, I leave what is real. You, who never coveted what wasn't yours, who worked with your own hands, you are the only one who deserves this trust." I had to close my eyes so the tears wouldn't blur the letters. My brother knew me better than I knew myself. I always thought he had forgotten me, that his fortune had pushed him away, and now I understood it had all been a plan, an act of faith in my simplicity. I turned the page. There I found detailed lists of investments, names of partners, transaction dates. There were also maps of lands in Sonora, with red marks indicating mines and hidden parcels. Everything was written with precision, as if he knew that one day I would have to continue his work. Next to the third chest on a shelf I found a small velvet box. I opened it and discovered a silver pen with his name engraved. Stephen. I held it in my fingers. The cold metal sent a strange warmth through my chest. I took out a blank piece of paper and signed my name with that pen. The ink flowed smoothly, perfectly, as if Stephen had just used it yesterday. Suddenly, a noise pulled me from my thoughts. Outside, on the gravel, I heard footsteps, a dry crunch, repeated, accompanied by the scrape of a sole on the dirt. My blood ran cold. I turned off the flashlight and held my breath. I slowly approached the half-open door. Through the crack, I saw the lights of a car that had just stopped. The headlights swept the entrance of the warehouse. The engine stayed on for a few seconds before cutting off. I recognized it instantly. Ryan's black car. The vehicle's door slammed shut. I saw my son-in-law's silhouette get out, light a cigarette, and take a deep drag. The red glow illuminated his face for an instant. He stood there looking around with the eyes of a predator, searching for any movement, any sign. The sound of his footsteps on the gravel echoed in my ears, sounding closer and closer. I was trapped. If he came in, he would discover everything. I felt the sweat run down my back. Then I remembered something. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out the second envelope I had found in the chest. I tore it open, and there, in small letters, Stephen had written, "If Ryan gets suspicious, lead him to warehouse number 15. A plan. Even for this, my brother had predicted Ryan wouldn't take long to follow me. I decided to act immediately. I carefully closed the leather notebook and hid it under the lid of the second chest. I made sure everything was just as I had found it. I took one last look at the gold, the bundles of cash, and the papers, and I felt the weight of responsibility fall on my shoulders as never before. Then I closed the metal gate, turned the key slowly, and slipped out the back door of the warehouse, a rusty exit that led to a narrow alley between two walls. I walked quickly, holding my breath, until I reached the back of the warehouse complex. I moved toward warehouse number 15. It was a ruined building, with peeling walls and a half-collapsed roof. The iron door was covered in rust and graffiti. Stephen had left a fake lock there, and a key that fit it perfectly. I placed the key in the lock and left it visible, as if someone had forgotten it. Everything was set for Ryan to fall into the trap. I heard his car engine approaching from the other side of the alley. I hid behind a ruined wall, my heart in my throat. Ryan walked toward the real warehouse first, testing the door, but found the padlock secure. He kicked the structure, growling under his breath. Then, as he turned toward the alley, he saw the number 15 and the key glinting in the dim light of a street lamp. Like a hungry animal, he lunged for it. He stuck the key in the lock and smiled in satisfaction when he heard the click. He pushed the door and entered with anxious steps. From the shadows I watched him disappear inside that empty shell. I heard him kicking rubble and moving rusty metal, convinced he would find something. His heavy breathing echoed in the silence. I backed away slowly, my feet on the soft sand so I wouldn't make noise. The echo of his curses faded behind me as I gained distance. In that moment, I knew I had followed Stephen's warning. I had followed his instructions to the letter. Ryan was where he was supposed to be, in the trap. And I, although my heart was pounding, had taken one more step on the path my brother had laid out for me. I hid behind a wall of crumbled bricks, holding my breath. From there, I had a partial view of the alley where warehouse number 15 was. Ryan advanced with quick steps, flashlight in one hand, the other clutching the keys like a trophy. His eyes gleamed with greed, like an animal that smells its prey. I saw him stop in front of the half-open door. The fake padlock hung there like an invitation. Ryan bent down, felt it with anxious fingers, and, convinced of his discovery, kicked the door violently. The shriek of the rusty hinges tore through the air. A cloud of dust rose, forcing him to cover his face. I pressed my fist to my chest so I wouldn't betray myself with a cough. I watched him enter the darkness. The flashlight lit up a ruined interior. Old, rusty sewing machines, empty boxes, forgotten scrap metal. The beam of light bounced off worthless metal parts. Ryan walked around like a madman, pulling open drawers, banging on drums. I heard him curse under his breath. "Damn it! That miserable old man is tricking me." The echo of his voice bounced off the empty walls. In his desperation, he pushed a rusty lathe, which fell with a loud crash, sending a metallic clang echoing through the warehouse complex. A pair of rats fled, running between his feet. One of them jumped onto his shoe. Ryan let out a yell, shook his leg, and kicked the air. From my hiding place, I put my hand to my mouth to keep from laughing. Seeing that man, so arrogant and proud, lose control over a few rats was a scene I never would have imagined. Not satisfied, he bent down to check a rusty trunk that was stored in a corner. He pulled it with effort, raising a cloud of dust, and opened it roughly. Inside, he only found papers destroyed by moisture and old rags. He threw them on the ground in anger. "Nothing! There's nothing!" he roared, slamming the lid against the wall. His face was twisted, red with fury. Sweat ran down his forehead, and his shirt stuck to his body. The flashlight trembled in his hand, revealing more empty boxes, more rusty iron, more disappointment. At that moment, a gust of wind swept through the alley. The warehouse door, loose on its hinges, slammed shut with a dry bang. Ryan jumped back, tripping over a box. His curse was lost in the echo. Damn! I ducked further behind the wall, watching him come out of the warehouse, his face distorted, breathing heavily. He was seething with rage. "That old man won't get away with this," he said through gritted teeth, as if he wanted the walls to hear him. I watched him light another cigarette, take a deep drag, and exhale the smoke in frustration. He looked from side to side, as if looking for my silhouette. I took a few steps back into the shadow so I wouldn't be seen. Finally, he got into his car and started it roughly. The tires kicked up stones and dust as they spun in the gravel. The roar of the engine faded away until only the silence of the night remained. I stayed still for a few minutes, making sure he wasn't coming back. Then, I walked to the real warehouse. I secured the lock, checked the edges of the door to confirm everything was in order, and put the key back in its safe place. I felt a rush of relief, though it was brief. I knew Ryan would soon be suspicious again, that he would keep hunting me like a dog. But tonight, I had bought some time. On the way back, I drove slowly on the dirt road. The truck's headlights barely lit up a few feet ahead. I was exhausted, but the thought of Sarah kept me alert. When I got to town, the hustle and bustle was over. The streets were almost empty, except for a couple of drunks arguing on the corner by the bar. I decided to stop at Mrs. Clare's store. The bell on the door chimed when I entered. "Mr. Julian!" the woman exclaimed, surprised. "I haven't seen you this late in a long time." "I just came for some sweet bread for my granddaughter," I said, trying to smile. She handed me a bag with freshly baked pastries. The warm, sweet aroma brought me a little peace. "I'm glad to see you looking well. You've seemed worried lately." I paid her and left with the bag in my hand, clutching it to my chest like a talisman. When I finally got to my house, Sarah was waiting for me in the living room, already in her pajamas. She ran to me, hugged me tight, and asked with an excited voice, "Did you bring me something, Grandpa?" I pulled out the bag, and her eyes lit up. She sat at the table and started eating, laughing. I watched her with tenderness, thinking about how close I had come to losing everything. I went to bed late that night. I checked the locks, looked out the window several times to make sure Ryan wasn't nearby. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Ryan wasn't the type to give up, and even though he had fallen into the trap, the next time he would come with more rage, more danger. I finally lay down, listening to Sarah's peaceful breathing in the next room. I closed my eyes with a certainty that chilled my blood. I had passed a difficult test, yes, but the real war was just beginning. A few days had passed since the incident at the fake warehouse. I tried to live life normally, watering the small garden in the yard, fixing the old hinges on the door, walking Sarah to the market when Isabella couldn't. But inside I knew the calm was a fragile disguise. Ryan hadn't shown his face, and that absence was more unsettling than his presence. One afternoon, as the sun was setting slowly and the day's heat clung to the walls, someone pounded violently on my front door. It wasn't a normal knock. They were hard, insistent blows, like someone who wasn't asking for permission but demanding entry. I opened it cautiously, and there was Ryan. His face was hard, his jaw tight, his eyes lit with a strange fire. In his hand he carried an unopened bottle of tequila, which he held up like a false flag of friendliness. "Father-in-law," he said, forcing a crooked smile, "I came to toast the family." He didn't wait for my reply. He pushed his way in, as if he owned the place. He walked to the living room table, slammed the bottle down, and looked for 2 glasses in the cabinet as if it were his own house. I followed him with my eyes, without saying a word. He uncapped the bottle. The strong aroma of tequila immediately filled the air. He poured 2 generous shots, handed one to me, and raised his. "To Stephen," he toasted, though his voice sounded hollow. I barely took a sip. He emptied his glass in one gulp. I could see his hand tremble when he refilled his cup. His eyes wouldn't stay still. They scanned the room, stopping on the chest in the corner, on the curtains, on my hands. Suddenly, without warning, he slammed his glass on the table with a crash that made me jump. The liquid splashed onto the wood. His breathing was heavy. "What are you hiding, old man?" he spat, leaning toward me. "I know that chest holds more than rusty nails." The silence became heavy. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and opened it. The cool air came in and moved the curtains, but it didn't clear the tension. I looked outside, at the sunny patio, and then turned my gaze back to Ryan. I didn't say anything at first. Isabella appeared in the kitchen, having heard the crash. Her hands were wet from washing dishes, her apron still on. "Ryan, stop it," she pleaded. "Don't bother my father." He spun around, furious, and with a rough gesture, pushed my daughter's hand away. "You stay out of this, Isabella. This is between your father and me." She stepped back, her eyes moist, not daring to say more. Ryan advanced toward me, the strong smell of alcohol enveloping him. His heavy steps echoed on the wooden floor. I didn't back down. I looked him straight in the eye, calmly, although inside my guts were on fire. "All you have," I said with a firm voice, "are houses, land, and cars. But what I have is Stephen's trust. That's something you will never have." For a second he stood still, as if my words had pierced him. Then he gritted his teeth in anger. His face twisted into a mask of hatred. "You stubborn old man, you'll pay for this." He slammed the door on his way out, so hard the whole house vibrated. I heard the roar of his car starting and the screech of tires kicking up dust in the street. The silence that remained was more unbearable than his shouting. Isabella collapsed into a chair, covering her face with her hands. Her sobs were full of shame, fear, and exhaustion. It hurt me to see her like that, trapped between the blind love for her husband and loyalty to her father. I didn't know what to say. Sarah ran in from the patio, frightened by the noise. She clung to my leg, trembling. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I'm scared." I picked her up in my arms, held her close, and stroked her hair. "It's okay, sweetheart. Nothing will hurt you here." But inside I knew I couldn't guarantee that. Ryan had crossed a line. It wasn't just greed anymore. Now it was personal hatred, aimed at me. That night, after putting Sarah to bed and securing the windows, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The bottle of tequila was still there, half empty. The glass still showed his fingerprints. I looked at the chest in the dim light. It wasn't just an object. It was the cause of everything that was happening. I thought about Stephen and his warnings. I thought about Ryan, how ambition was consuming him, turning him into a shadow of himself. And I thought about my daughter, trapped in the middle of this storm. I took a deep breath. I knew then with certainty that what was coming would be final. Ryan wouldn't stop. And I, though old, would have to be ready for the final confrontation. News travels faster than the wind in a small town. It wasn't long before the rumors about Ryan reached my ears. They said he had started selling the land Stephen had left him, convinced that a new silver mining project would make him a millionaire in a few weeks. Every time I went to the market, I heard the same chatter, that Ryan is going to be richer than Stephen, some muttered, raising an eyebrow with envy. I listened in silence, without offering an opinion. I knew my son-in-law too well to know that this was all just another trap of ambition. The bars were full of excited voices, men claiming Ryan had inside information, that soon the family's wealth would multiply. He himself paraded through town like a conqueror, promising deals to everyone, buying rounds of tequila as if he were already swimming in money. But reality hit harder than any hangover. A few weeks later, the news spread like wildfire. The supposed investor in the project disappeared overnight, taking all the capital with him. I was in the town square when I heard a man reading an announcement posted on the door of the mayor's office. The bank was announcing foreclosures. The list included Ryan's name and the address of the big house he boasted so much about owning. That same afternoon I walked slowly to the entrance of the mansion. There on the iron gate a white paper with red letters fluttered. Foreclosed. A symbol of ruin for the man who just days ago believed he owned everything. Ryan was sitting in the middle of the patio, his shirt open and the tequila bottle almost empty. His face was red, his eyes sunken. He cursed everyone, the bank, the partner who had tricked him, fate, even Stephen and me. He smashed bottles on the ground, the glass flying like pieces of his shattered pride. The neighbors, gathered behind the gates, whispered among themselves, "From the sky to the ground. That's how it ends for those who disrespect family." I said nothing. I stood there for a few moments, watching the sad spectacle. The man who had believed he was at the top, reduced to screaming obscenities among ruins. As night fell, Isabella appeared at my door, her eyes swollen from crying, and her hands full of suitcases. Sarah followed her, clutching her rag doll. "Dad," she said, her voice broken, I can't do this anymore. I don't want Sarah to grow up around screaming in debt. I welcomed them without hesitation. I opened the doors of my home, set the suitcases by the wall, and prepared the small room next to the kitchen for them. Sarah ran to me, threw herself into my arms, and hid her face in my chest. I knew I had made the right decision. This home would be their refuge. While Isabella settled in, Ryan's screams could still be heard in the distance, like the wails of a wounded animal. But no one went to comfort him. Not his supposed drinking buddies, nor the partners who had made empty promises. They had all abandoned him. That night, I lit the oil lamp. The three of us sat around the wooden table. I broke the sweet bread I had bought at the store and served cups of hot cocoa. The aroma filled the room. Sarah laughed as she got foam on her lips. It was the first time in days I had heard her laugh with such joy. I watched her and felt the weight of the last few months lighten a little. Maybe all that suffering had been worth it to get to this moment. The family united, far from Ryan's shadow. But the calm didn't last. The next morning, the police arrived in town. The rumors about the mining project fraud had reached the state offices. Ryan wasn't just in debt. He was also accused of money laundering and getting involved in dirty deals. I watched from my window as he resisted, stumbling while the officers tried to handcuff him. He shouted my name, insulted everyone, tried to convince Isabella to defend him. No one paid him any attention. They finally put him in the patrol car, his hands tied and his dignity in pieces. The neighbors watched from the sidewalks, some with relief, others with contempt. No one cried for him. On those faces, a clear message could be read. You reap what you sow. That afternoon, when the town returned to its routine and the echo of the patrol car disappeared, I sat down again at the table with my daughter and granddaughter. The silence in the house was no longer heavy. It was a peaceful silence. Sarah, with her childlike curiosity, looked at me seriously and asked, "Grandpa, what's the real inheritance?" I looked her in the eyes. Her cheeks still had traces of cocoa. Her innocence disarmed me. I stroked her hair tenderly and replied, "Trust and honesty, sweetheart. Money disappears, but those last forever." She smiled and went back to her sweet bread, peaceful. I lit the oil lamp. The golden light illuminated our faces. I saw Isabella relaxed for the first time in a long time, and Sarah laughing with her innocence intact. I felt a deep serenity. There, in my humble home, I understood that the real treasure wasn't the gold bars or the hidden bills. The real treasure was seeing my family reunited, safe, far from the greed that had destroyed Ryan. And inside, I knew that from this day forward, we would start a new life, built on the only things that can never be foreclosed: love, trust, and honor. If this story moved you, I invite you to subscribe to William's Revenge Stories. Leave your comment and share the video so more people can know it. This way, you support us in continuing to tell stories that touch the heart. May God bless your life and your family with health, peace, and hope.